Okay, awesome. So welcome to the Jenkins X office hours. I think we're just going to try and have a bit of a status update of where we are with Jenkins X 3 Alpha, kind of show some of the project boards, some of the initiatives, and just talk a little bit about that. The focus is totally, we're really trying to focus and nail down efforts around Jenkins X 3 and looking, hopefully by next office hours, we'll have some clearer targets of where we're going for the beta release as well. So that's really good. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we've been doing more recently. James is going to talk a bit about some of the Tekton integration, the native Tekton integration, which is looking awesome. I'm very excited. We're all very excited about that. So that's great as well. So just to, I guess, we can start things off. Let me just share my screen a second. We should check there's nothing behind it, but there we go. Right, okay, let's. So there is, just to start things off, there has been, for anybody that doesn't know, there is a DocSig on a Monday, and there's a bunch of folks that come together and we talk around docs things. There's also a there's also a platform or testing SIG as well on a Friday. It's a really horrible time, 4 p.m. on a Friday. It gets in the way of your wine time if anybody else is on UK time. But come along to these sessions or maybe reach out afterwards, check the notes. They're all on HackMD as well. And get involved as well. There is, out of the DocSig, there has been something quite brilliant actually that we've been after for quite some time, which actually just merged this morning from Nitin, who is our Google Season of Docs person, which is fantastic. If we go to, the docs page on the website, we do talk about how we're going to be revamping this, and probably in the 2 weeks, I think it was, Cara, we're going to try and do a bit of a design phase around some of this, how we integrate the JX3 docs. But at the moment, all the JX3 Alpha docs are in this section here. If we go to the About page, and we go down to this maturity level matrix, we have a shiny new maturity level matrix with the capabilities of Jenkins X3. Again, this is just focusing on the alpha. Nitin got these PRs up and they got merged. And we're really, really pleased with this. So don't hold us to anything. We're trying to give some kind of visibility and insight of where we are with the status of the features. We know that people are coming online onto Slack and saying, how do we integrate with TLS and DNS? It's possible, but we haven't got that proven, tested, documented yet. So we really, as an example, we want to try and have a landing place people can go to and look at where the support is currently of the alpha and where people might want to dive in and help contribute, or maybe where to stay away from for a week or two, maybe come back and check in. We're going to keep this up to date. Encourage you to have a little look at this. These are the targets for the initial Jenkins X3 release. Again, we're in alpha at the moment. The capabilities on the left for Jenkins X3, and these are the platforms. So Google Cloud, EKS and AKS here. There's a little bit more information. Go and have a little read of it, please, if you can, about what the colors mean. And then there's also at the bottom here, looking further past the initial GA of Jenkins X3, where we want to be aiming for and targeting different platforms and support as well. So yeah, please go and have a little look at that. As for a bit more of a status update, there is a project board which we now have, which we can start adding a little more to. Please, if you're working on parts of Jenkins X3 that you want to be present in here, please reach out and get those issues raised and tasks added on. Right now, we have quite a few things. Most of it is around testing, automated testing. We're just trying to get some of the major, the last couple of major functionality bits that we want to be included. Specifically, there is some area around native Tekton Catalog support and also better Tekton integration, which James is going to talk about shortly. Sorry for any noise in the background of my kids killing each other by the sounds of it. And then we've also got Octant views for health. This is, let me close my door. Sorry about that. Okay, so this other task here is around Octant views for health. Now, we've always found that with A lot of the challenges we've always had with Jenkins X and people have had with Jenkins X is how do we know when things are going well and right and in a good position so that we can actually, everything's operating as it should be. So what we're actually looking at doing is integrating with Kubernetes, so that which is a nice open source project which helps us run periodic checks. And then we're going to have a nice CLI and UI visualization to be able to know how the Jenkins X installation is going, constant checks on health and common problems that people have. We know that people maybe want to know about whether pods are stuck, but also whether tokens are valid or whether secrets are set up. So a whole number of checks people can then go on and extend with. In a roundabout way, this is some of the bit that I've been working at recently. And a week ago, kind of just sat down to start it. And then the first plugin that we did, library that we did, had to import a Kubernetes client, which has a dependency. This is a bit geeky, but it has a dependency on Kubernetes client Go, a new version. Now, for anybody that's actually using Golang libraries and using the Kubernetes libraries, they'll probably be familiar. This can actually have a bit of a hard time having dependencies on Kubernetes libraries. Turns out that we had to go, well, we took the decision to upgrade all of the Jenkins X libraries and plugins to the latest dependency versions of Jenkins X available, the stable version, and ensure that all repos are also building with Golang 1.15 as well. So it's a pretty big effort. And just to kind of show how that kind of looks, we've got, this is the Jenkins X3 view of how we kind of have our repositories and our more modular approach. We have a set of libraries, reusable libraries that we've got at the top. So all of these are now SEMVer compliant. They have a v3 SEMVer version. So if you import these, then you can actually get version 3. These are all useful, handy functions that people use. We've pulled out the JX code base and we've added to. So it's really nice, clean libraries here. Now we've also upgraded then any of our plugins that we have down here. So we've got secrets and preview and verify. I think we've done pretty much all of them now. I think pipeline was the last one. I think, James, you were looking at pipeline, right?
I think we've still got preview to do.
Preview,
apart from that, but I've got pipeline done. Yeah. Yeah. I did
so
one.
Well, no, it's a big undertaking, right? And just, I know this is it is a little bit geeky, but it takes, this for me is I drool over this. This is really quite nice to be able to see. This is a diff of a Go module of one of our libraries of helpers, for example, which we can see is now a v3, but you can see the removal, and then more importantly, the removal of all these odd hacks that we have to do for Go modules just to get things to compile. So now everything is on the latest Kubernetes version on every single repo that we care about and people may use. So we have a nice grounding that we are now be able to not only build on top of those reusable libraries, but also have good examples for people to extend their own plugins and add to as we build out the plugin ecosystem as well. So that's kind of where we are now. And now a week later, after having to upgrade all of those, we've now started on the health views as well. So that's really exciting. The next office hours we'll be able to do a proper show of the health statuses that we're adding in. So that was probably from me. Carry on with some of the status. James, do you want to go and have a little bit of a talk about this?
Yeah, I could talk about Tekton. Do you want me to do Tekton?
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago, we made this Jenkins X YAML. And at the time, we were trying to work with Jenkins or Tekton. At the time, Tekton looked very verbose. You had to make lots and lots of resources. It looked really complicated. So we thought maybe we need this kind of domain-specific language to kind of abstract above Tekton and Jenkins. Now the world's kind of changed and Jenkins X defaults to using Tekton. And Tekton has improved quite a bit. So now you can just write a pipeline run with everything inside one resource, which simplifies things massively. And there's always been this kind of challenge. The initial design of the Jenkins X YAML was based on following a little bit like the Jenkins pipeline library model of having shared libraries, and you compose pipelines together to make new pipelines and so forth. Because we're all worried about copying and pasting huge, complicated pipelines across every single repository and then having a maintenance nightmare. A new open source project came out this year from Google called Kept. It's spelled KPT, but pronounced Kept. And it's generally a tool that lets you share blobs of source code across repositories and be able to update globally those files and share those changes across different Git repositories. To say that a different way, it provides a nice simple way of sharing pipelines between Git repositories while preserving local and global changes. So we've got a different approach to doing pipelines that's just merged this weekend. Now, we've still got Jenkins X YAML support, so you can still do Jenkins X YAML if you wish. But if you want, and by default we use this, we use vanilla Tekton pipelines now in the build packs. Now, it's probably easy if I just show you, I'll show you the docs first, and then I'll show you what this kind of looks like. And that will, it's probably easier to look at it than it is to describe it. So let me just share my screen a second. There we go, share screen. Okay, can you see the website? Yeah?
Yep.
Cool. So if you go to the docs section, there's a little page of docs on this, and you look at the 3 alpha, and you look at guides. There's a little pipeline catalogs page that kind of describes what's changed, why it's changed, and how you can kind of use it. But let me show you an example project. So I created a quick start a little while ago. And if I just look in the source code of this quick start, here it is. If I look in here, now you'll notice this is a quick start that I created a little while ago. You notice there's no Jenkins X YAML in here. So by default, new quick starts don't use Jenkins X YAMLs. They use this Lighthouse folder, that .lighthouse/Jenkins X. And if you look inside the Jenkins X folder, we basically have a trigger definition, which I'll show in a second, and then we have a release and a pull request. And each one of these is just a vanilla Tekton pipeline run. So this is 100% vanilla Tekton pipeline run. So anything Tekton pipeline runs can do, you can put in this YAML file. It's fairly big because there's quite a lot of parameters, and it's slightly verbose because you have to declare all your parameters, and then you have to pass your parameters in, and then you declare task parameters, and then you pass those in, and then eventually you define the steps here. Now the steps are fairly concise. If you look at the steps, if you kind of in your IDE collapse all those other trees and you just look at the steps are basically an image, a command, and a bunch of arguments. And the images, the steps are fairly concise. So if you just kind of scroll down, these are all the steps in the pipeline. So they're fairly simple. They're fairly easy to edit. Now there's a whole bunch of different IDE plugins for editing Tekton. Tekton YAML is effectively a standard of sorts for defining cloud native pipelines. So we're hoping the IDE plugins get better and better for visualizing these and editing them and making it easy to change. But a common question we hear again and again is, I have a pipeline, how do I change a step? How do I add a step? How do I add an environment variable? How do I change a command line argument in a step? Well, now you just find the file. It's either the pipeline file for release or the pipeline file for pull requests, and you just edit it, right? If you want to edit the npm install command, you just edit the npm install command and git commit, and you're good to go. So it's, in terms of changing pipelines, it's a really simple way of doing it. Now, you might wonder, what happens when we change the global pipeline library, and how do we apply changes locally? Now, you might not have noticed it yet, but if you've been using v3, we've been using Kept already to keep track of the version stream. We've been using, as we got more confident with Kept and used it more and more, we've been using Kept in more and more places. And now we're using Kept to distribute the pipelines. So if I look inside the folder, inside Jenkins X, I'll show you one other file, by the way. There's a file called triggers. And the triggers file is basically the pre-submit and the post-submit section from the Lighthouse or Prow configuration files. Now, if you've never looked at those, don't worry about them. But if you ever have looked at them, they're quite a large, complicated blob of YAML. But the cool thing, and the thing you really care about, is being able to define pre-submits. In other words, pipelines that trigger on a pull request. So pre-submit is the Lighthouse or Proud terminology for pipelines that trigger before you before you merge a pull request. So pre-submits are basically pull request pipelines. And then post-submits are after you've merged. So those are the release pipelines. Now you can just edit this file to add new pipelines, which is great. So if you just want to write a new pipeline to do linting, you could just add a new pre-submit, give it a name lint, think of a retest and trigger command, decide if it always runs on every pull request or you have to opt in to run it using a chatops command, and then give it a pipeline run and you're good to go. So without understanding all of the Jenkins X YAML and the inheritance hierarchy and how things are overridden and all that kind of stuff, you can just edit locally files and it just kind of works, which is great. But then the next question could be, how do I keep all of these things in sync? And how can I have like a global shared library of pipelines and then roll out changes across repositories and all those kind of things? So there's this other file in here called a kept file. And this kept file describes where this directory comes from. So it comes from this Git repository, and it's this Git commit that was used to populate this folder. And this is the location in the Git repository where this came from. So if I look at that Git repository, this is the new Tekton Catalog version of the build packs that we've often called. We're calling it the pipeline catalog now because it's a bit more descriptive, because build pack is confusing because there's a project called the CNCF build pack, which is all about making container images mostly. So this is very similar to the pipeline catalogs you've seen before. So if I look inside the JavaScript folder, we'll see we've got the charts folder, the preview folder, we've got a Docker file, and we've got the .lighthouse folders. Now, what's interesting about the preview folder, this is the preview environment, which uses a Helm file. Notice there's a kept file there. This is saying where this comes from. And so we've got a shared preview environment using kept, which is actually shared across all of the languages. So rather than copying and pasting the preview stuff into like JavaScript and Maven and Go, we're actually sharing this code in the preview folder across all the different languages. We've done the same thing for the Helm chart, because the Helm charts are generally the same for pretty much every language. That they sometimes have minor tweaks. So again, there's a kept file here because this is saying where do these come from? So we have a shared preview environment, a shared Helm chart. And right now, all the pipelines are slightly different. So each language has its own pipeline. But again, we could use a shared base and then extend them on a per language basis. So basically, we have a mechanism for defining global files that are language neutral, and then language pipelines, and then being able to share files across all of them. And then finally, you can then use these in your quick starts. And then more importantly, you can upgrade your quick start to the latest version of the files from the pipeline catalog. And we've kind of documented how to do that. If you look in upgrading pipelines and Helm charts, if you've ever tried version 3, you'll know that this magic command, JX GitOps upgrade, is used to upgrade your cluster whenever the version stream changes. We can use the exact same command to upgrade your quick starts if ever the Helm chart changes, the preview environment changes, or the pipeline catalog changes. And what's interesting about this JX GitOps upgrade command is it's really just generic kept. It literally iterates through the file system or the directory and looks for all those kept files. And for every kept file, it looks to see, has there been a change in the source of the kept file? So it's a way of basically pushing out changes across repositories. Now, we traditionally try to fix this, like the Jenkins project tried to fix this by doing a template, a pipeline composition model. We did something similar with the early version of Jenkins X, having a composition model compiling together pipelines across lots of Git repositories, which kind of worked, but was really kind of complicated because then everybody has to understand this complexity. Now we have just a really, really simple model where each of these blobs of files, whether it's a Helm chart, whether it's a Tekton, YAML, it doesn't really matter what it is. Each of these files is composed together using kept, a generic solution. You can then modify files locally, and kept can keep them in sync. Just one other detail about kept. Kept, when you're doing an upgrade, you have strategies for how you do the upgrade. You can always assume the global one is correct, and it will basically just replace your changes. You can do a diff. You can do a git patch, which will basically try and keep your local changes and keep the upstream changes and merge them together, rather like when you do a pull request on an open source project. And if there's any conflicts, it will keep those conflicts local, and then you could use your IDE to resolve the conflicts and then move forwards. So it gives you these strategies for how to have shared code, like shared build, shared pipeline catalogs, and how to distribute those across projects. Now, we've only just started to scratch the surface with kept. I mean, it's been working really, really well with a version stream for us. I've been using it myself with the pipeline catalog for a while, and it seems to be working pretty well. I do think we're probably going to have a bit more tooling around this at scale. For example, if you have 100 projects, 100 quick starts, and we change the pipeline catalog, we probably want to have some kind of rolling upgrade thing that does one repository at a time and does like a pull request on it or something to upgrade the pipeline catalog or something like that. So you might want to use some kind of chat ops. You might want to do rolling upgrades or something like that. We don't yet have a way to automatically generate pull requests on all of your quick starts to upgrade your pipeline catalog, which we should do. Right now, you have to manually do that. But then it's worth mentioning, certainly for the Helm charts, we've never had a way of upgrading them, right? Whenever you create a quick start, you get a copy of the Helm chart, and then it's up to you to manage it from then on. At least now we have a way that you can upgrade. So we can change the Helm charts centrally, and then you can upgrade all of your quick starts to use the upgraded Helm charts. We're hoping to do the same thing with the pipeline library pretty soon. So this is really exciting in that we can use vanilla Tekton now. So that anything in Tekton we've always wanted to use, like sidecars and conditions and so on and so forth, we can just go to town and do all of that stuff. It's worth mentioning, by the way, we've moved to the latest, greatest Lighthouse and the latest, greatest Tekton versions, which is great. So the latest upstream Tekton. Although I just noticed this morning there's a new 1.17. So we're one release away from the latest Tekton, but we will be back to the latest Tekton very soon. So that's really, really cool. It would be good for us to add a bit more tooling to make it easy to add new folders in here. Now you might wonder, by the way, if I look in the quick start again, another little detail, you might wonder, why is there a Lighthouse folder and then another folder inside Lighthouse? So there's Lighthouse and then there's Jenkins X in a folder in there. And we've specifically designed this so that there's a Lighthouse folder where all of your Lighthouse triggers live. And then you can have many folders under here. So for example, somebody could write an amazing linter and call it amazing linter. And you could have a folder here called amazing linter. And that could be packaged using kept at some Git repository somewhere. And that could be released independently and upgraded independently. And anybody could choose to opt into that, that pipeline catalog. And we can have many pipeline catalogs now, each providing different pre-submit or post-submits. And they could be all composed together in a quick start. So this Lighthouse folder can have many folders inside it. Each folder is kept from a source using kept, and then can be upgraded independently. So we can now have an ecosystem of separate fragments of pipeline catalogs. Another thing we should be able to do fairly soon is be allowed to import into quick starts a specific part of the Tekton catalog from Tekton itself. So there's a project called Tekton, if I can type properly, Tekton Catalog, there we go. Tekton is a Git repository that basically just has lots and lots of reusable tasks. So if I look in here at the tasks, and if I look at, let me pick a good example. Let's find a nice one. Well, let's do Istio Canary release. So here's an Istio Canary release task. So it's a task, it's vanilla Tekton, so I might want to use this Istio canary release task, which is great. So you should be able to import this YAML using kept directly inside your quick start. The only thing you're missing is the necessary trigger for Lighthouse to trigger it and define, is it a pre-submit, is it a post-submit, and so on and so forth. I'm hoping we could do a small wizard, and a fairly simple wizard, that if you find a useful task in a Tekton catalog, it could generate the boilerplate kept for you and the boilerplate trigger YAML for you. So you could find this task and say, I'd like to use the canary task, trigger it on a post submit, and give it a name or whatever, and it would do all the kept stuff for you. So fairly soon, we should be able to basically just easily consume anything from the Tekton catalog inside your quick starts. And I'm hoping we can start to build and reuse more of the Tekton catalog inside the actual Jenkins X pipeline catalog as well. But you're free to just go ahead right now and use anything from the Tekton ecosystem right now, which is really cool. So slightly long ramble there, but the quick story is we can now use any vanilla pipeline runs. One other detail, by the way, if I go to Jenkins X, I should mention about supporting Jenkins X as well. If I look at my repositories, this is my cluster Git repository. And when you have a cluster, a development cluster, it copies in the version stream from a shared version stream. And inside, this is how it all kind of works behind the curtain. Now, you don't need to care about this, but if you want to know how it works, this is how it works. There's a schedulers folder. Now, in Jenkins X v2, we used to use scheduler custom resources. And we used to query scheduler custom resources and use those scheduler custom resources to decide what does the Lighthouse config looks like. In other words, what pre-submits and what post-submits and what Lighthouse plugins to use and so forth. Various things has been happening with the Lighthouse project as the schedulers have been improved and changed and whatnot. So we've switched to a completely pure GitOps way of defining the schedulers now. So they're literally just YAML files in Git, so it's much simpler. And each one of these is compliant with Lighthouse. And look, this is the meta pipeline. So for those of you who've used V2, V2 has this thing where it would git clone your source code. It would then look at the source code and then generate a Tekton pipeline dynamically by looking at the source code of your quick start and then looking at the source code in the pipeline catalog. So it would be a dynamic generation of the pipeline. Really, we've been able to make a static Tekton pipeline that implements the Jenkins X meta pipeline. So if you're using a Jenkins X YAML, this is the actual pipeline that gets used. Now in the scheduler, you can define a static global pipeline run now. So this is a Lighthouse feature. In the Lighthouse configuration, you can specify an explicit pipeline run that is used and it's applied to a Git repository. So in the latest, greatest Lighthouse, you basically got two choices. You can configure all of your pipelines centrally in one big Git repository or config map or something. Or you can define the pipeline runs inside the Git repository that's been triggered. Or you can do both. You could have some pre-submits or post-submits defined globally, and you can have some pre-submits or post-submits defined inside the repository. Now on the Jenkins X project, we like the idea of doing it inside the repository and using kept to distribute them, because it means if you want to know, if you want to change in one of your quick starts, you want to change the pipeline, you just change the pipeline. You just edit the code in your Git repository and everything is there. Having stuff centrally is a little bit more complicated. People often don't know where things are stored. It takes a while to find. The config is then usually pretty massive. But to cut a long story short, this scheduler is a single scheduler that you generally shouldn't have to change. But this scheduler defines how to run a Jenkins X meta pipeline. So if you are using Jenkins X YAML, this pipeline turns it into a Tekton pipeline and then runs it. So we still have support for Jenkins X YAML, but we also have support for just having your own Tekton pipelines or using the Tekton version of the Jenkins X pipelines that we distribute as part of that catalog. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of confusing, but it's one of those things, it's easy just to try it really. If you try Jenkins X v3, you probably won't notice any difference at all. It just looks and feels the same. Although one thing you will notice the difference if you look behind the curtain is when we're using the new pipeline catalog, so this pipeline catalog, I'm using the new pipeline catalog because the Git repository has the actual Tekton pipeline inside it. So for example, if I merge to master, Lighthouse just looks in here and says, oh, there's the pipeline. I'll just run it. So we don't use a meta pipeline by default in V3 anymore. We just run this pipeline, which means it's simpler. There's one pipeline run triggered for each pre-submit or post-submit by default. There's not this meta pipeline, which then triggers another pipeline. So it's faster. It's much faster. There's less resources used. But also, it used to be kind of confusing. Particularly, a lot of people have banged their heads on things like set version. So the meta pipeline used to do the set version stuff, where it would tag Git and generate a version and then modify some files. Now, all of that set version, if I search for set version, if I search for version, if I scroll down, bear with me a second. I'll show you the set version stuff. Okay, maybe I can't find it. Oh, there we go, JX step tag. The JX step tag is the thing that tags Git and creates a new version, or it uses that version thing. And then the next version, that's it, the next version, not set version. Next version is the thing that generates a new version number and then writes it to a file version, and then this step tag then tags Git with that version and modifies files and whatnot. Now, if you don't like how that works, you can just replace it in your pipeline run and do whatever you want, right? So this stuff used to be slightly hard-coded into the meta pipeline, and it was a real nightmare to change. Now everything's just pipeline runs. You can do whatever you want now. So a pipeline in Jenkins X now is anything Tekton can do. So the floodgates are open. You can literally do anything you want. But at the same time, we're trying to nudge people down guardrails by having reusable pipeline catalogs that do everything in a reasonably consistent way. But you can easily just edit these steps, delete steps you don't like, modify steps completely, change the image, state the command line, and environment variables and so forth. And any questions on all this? It's quite deep and rich, but it's kind of simple from a high level, but it's possibly very confusing at the same time.
So how do we enforce central governance now if there's no way to intervene in local pipelines?
That's a great question. I'd enforce central governance by analyzing pull requests. Well, so the first thing, you could disable local pipelines. So that's one thing. You could say, we're not going to allow any pipelines to be in repository. They all have to be shared. So you could just disable this feature completely. You could just say, right, we're not going to support a scheduler that supports in repository. So you could just go disallow that. So you could disallow it. The other option is you could just run a governance check on all of your pull requests to check whatever you want to happen in the pipeline happens. So for example, let's give a more concrete example. Let's say you have a security scan step. You could have a security scan step defined centrally so that whenever you do a pull request, the security scan runs globally. Sorry, you globally define the security scan. And you could use a pull request to disable people modifying that pipeline. So you could have global pipelines defined that do linting, security scanning, whatever. But then for say the release or the test, you could let people change those. So there's various different permutations you could take on this. You could disable in repository configs, in repository pipelines. You could have global pipelines which you can't disable. So everyone has to run the security scan check, and that's defined globally, and you can't change it at all. Or you allow people to modify the security scan to configure things, but you need an admin to review those changes because you can use a different owners file on that pipeline. Each of these pipelines can be in different folders, and you can have different owners files in different folders. So you could say, only a security person can modify the security folder pipelines in every Git repository. So the quick answer is, there's nothing there today, right? The quick answer is, but there's lots of ways we could enforce this and do governance in a better way, right? Where we could say, for example, certain pipelines you just cannot modify. We're going to do them once, they're going to be global, and you can't modify them. when it comes down to like the nuts and bolts, even something like code scanning, sometimes you do want to modify them locally. Like you might need to change the memory limit on the code scanner because one project could blow up the code scanner because it's too big or too small or whatever. So I think we're always going to want to modify things locally, but I think we can use the owners files to decide who can change them and who can approve them. And I think we can do better bots that look for people disabling things, like, you know, stop you disabling security scanning, that let you configure it maybe, you know, with some well-defined configuration changes, but don't let you do kind of silly things. But I think to really nail the governance problem, I think it needs a bit more work and thought. And I think we maybe need to define some, I think it would be nice if a few of us defined policies for their groups and teams, and we kind of shared them a little bit, or at least looked at each other's policies to see what are some good policies we could enforce across repositories. I mean, certainly things like not being able to disable the policy scan step. I mean, I should make it very clear, by the way, you could take security scanning and make that its own pipeline. So you could have a security scan pipeline, and that pipeline to scan for, you know, malicious images or libraries, that could be defined globally, completely separate from the pipeline that makes a preview environment or the pipeline that runs Maven test or whatever. So we can compose pipelines together globally and locally, and they're all composed together using ChatOps. But I think we could definitely do much better to help people enforce governance. So maybe we need a governance pipeline that enforces that steps happen, for example. I know the Grapheus folks have been doing work on when you run a governance check or an image scan, it tags images with secure keys that says the scan has been done. So maybe that's the thing we need to focus on, you know, checking that outputs have been scanned. How the pipelines run is maybe less of a worry, I don't know. But yeah, it's a great question, Terry, and I think we definitely need to work on it. But a quick fix is have global pipelines that you can't get out of for things like linting, code quality, coverage, scanning. Those could be declared completely globally, and you could disable people even changing them if you want. And maybe the slightly less restrictive is you need a secure, you know, a central governance person to approve changes to those pipelines. But because they're in a separate folder, they can be treated separately because of owners files. Does that help? And any other questions about anything to do with this? I mean, generally it's awesome, but at the same time, it leads to more flexibility, which means we might need more governance tools for sure.
I think one of the main things as well is around more standardization, right? Yeah. I think someone's just come off. Like, sorry,
Yeah.
does someone have a question?
Yeah, James. So you said that we can disable the local pipeline, right? And we can only opt for the global pipeline. So can we do it at the time of import of our project? If we have some projects, we have some configuration at the time of import?
Yeah, so when you import a project, you can specify, let me show you, JX project. You can specify a scheduler when you import a project, but you can only reference a scheduler that exists in the cluster. So you could have like an admin or a governance team define what are the schedulers that you can use. And you could not allow in repository schedulers. So let me show you in the command line. Where's the command line? I'll go in the docs file. Docs, command line, give me a second, project import. When you do an import, one of the command line arguments you can give is a scheduler. You can give it the name of a scheduler. And if you do give it the name of a scheduler, it uses the default for your team using the team settings. So you can say, I'm going to have a scheduler called default, but you might want a couple of different schedules for a couple of different kinds of pipelines or something maybe. Now, when you import a project, you're only allowed to use the schedulers which are defined in Git in your development cluster. And all the schedulers defined in Git, I've lost my repository here in this folder. So if you don't want to allow in-repository configuration, just delete that file. If you delete that file, no one can define the scheduler in repo, and none of this .lighthouse stuff is supported anymore. You can't import a project like that. So the default one assumes a Jenkins X YAML. The environments one currently uses in-repository config, and the in-repository config does. But you could just make everything just Jenkins X YAMLs if you wish. It's totally up to you. But these schedulers are the thing which enable those or configure those. So if you import a project, let me show you an example. So I've imported a variety of projects in this Git repository. And there's a file called source config, which contains all of the Git repositories and the scheduler that's used for them all. So you can see this one is using the meta pipeline, and this one is using in repository. You can define the default schedule as well at a group level, which makes everything a bit more dry. But I've been very specific in this file. But if you want, you could just get rid of all of those in repo configs, and just, if there's no in repo config, it can't use it when you import the project. And if somebody imports it and it's wrong, you can always change it here. It's just a file in Git. So this is how the different schedulers are applied to the source repositories. And what basically happens is these different schedulers are used to generate the Lighthouse config. And when you import a project or modify this file, there's a pull request on this Git repository with the new Lighthouse configuration file. So the other thing you can do is whenever somebody imports a project, whatever they did and whatever's in Git, you can use approval on the pull request to see, am I happy with that scheduler that's being used? So you could use just normal code review to approve or deny importing. So so long as you keep ownership and owners on the development cluster, basically no one can do anything without generating pull requests on this. So this is your, if you like, your central governance. If you have a governance team that owns merging pull requests here, you're in full control of what schedulers are used, which Git repositories are imported, and at least looking at the pull requests, you can see the changes that take place. To give you an example, this is a good example. Whenever you submit a pull request, the initial pull request could be quite small, like promote a new version. But once you've submitted a pull request, you get a generated pull request, which here's what's actually going to happen. Here's the actual changes to the YAML that's really going to take place in your cluster. So it's a little bit verbose, quite frankly, and we could probably do a much better job making it easy for people to review. But if you really cared about schedulers, it'd be very easy to review all the pull requests and see, hang on a minute, you're using a different scheduler here, I'm going to disallow that. Or you're trying to do in-repository configs here, I'm going to disallow that. So you can use the pull requests as the final arbiter. But we could definitely make the tooling easier so that we could, maybe when you do an import, let me show an import. Maybe when we do an import of a project, we could flag the scheduler in a comment or something. So it's a bit more kind of obvious. There's an import, for example. So that was the initial import. It changes the scheduler. And then the second commit that happens is it generates the effective Lighthouse configuration change. So these are the changes that happens in the Lighthouse config. Now it could be that we do a better comment on the pull request that says, this new scheduler is going to be used and this is using a local config or whatever, or this doesn't have a security scan. Are you sure you want to do this, or whatever it is? So I'm sure we could improve the commit messages. So I've been rambling for quite a long time. Any more questions on any of this stuff?
Okay,
Oh,
awesome.
sharing.
So just to dial that back then, so there was two on that project board we showed at the very start. There are two main efforts really that we're focusing on. One is around health, the other is around Tekton as well. So we're trying to be make sure we're drawing some lines before we can then focus on getting to beta. So we don't want to be carrying on adding lots and lots of functionality. We want to be drawing a line, and making sure then we're addressing all the areas that we need to get to beta. There'll be some guidelines that we're working on going up on the website about what beta means very soon as well. Part of that will also be removing anything that we don't want to get into beta as well, because again, reminding everyone this is an alpha, but it's been amazing to have it so many people involved, so much hard work by so many people, some very long hours we can see from very far away time zones as well. So it's been fantastic to see everyone really getting behind this and getting involved. So just want to say a big thank you to that as well. So yes, so hopefully we'll with the next office hours, let's aim for anybody else that might have anything they want to show, because we know there's quite a lot of people that can't make the office hours but are still working on Jenkins X3. So please, if you see the recording, then maybe we can do it at a different time, or just share it, do a blog or something and share it around, and we'll get that up on the website and tweet it as well. And yes, anything else, please remember the SIGs as well, the doc SIG and the platform and testing SIGs as well.
Also, while we're inviting everyone to engage, the CDCon starts this week, the 7th and 8th. Tomorrow, there is a Birds of a Feather session for Jenkins X, the same time as this meeting. So tomorrow, what would that be? I always forget for UTC. What do we say for that? Is it?
So is it
1300 UTC? Yeah,
yeah,
exactly same time as this meeting. And the other shout out for the CDF, which I would be really happy if we did this. I'm involved with the CDF's interoperability SIG, same time as this meeting, every other Thursday. So you're all welcome to be involved in that, but I would really like James Strachan and James Rawlings. You're often in attendance, but it would be great to speak about Tekton Catalog during that SIG. I think I would really.
I've actually signed up to writing, there's something in the interrupt thing to write about Tekton and Jenkins X. Maybe we can just hand that off to James.
Yes, well now that we have this now that we have this excellent new development using Tekton Catalog, I think it's a good time to start talking about the interoperability SIG and writing that up.
Just to reiterate one of those points as well. I mean, it's really key, because there's so many things we can carry on doing, so many improvements, like all the things that James was just showing then. I mean, it really does expose other things that we want to improve as well. Having smaller images, for example, more discrete images, better pipelines, healthier pipelines, faster, more standardized pipelines. There's so much work we can do once we get to this. It's what we're trying to do is get to a beta where we're not adding any more functionality. We're not going to be removing anything. We can just then improve. So hopefully, if you've got any thoughts or views around any of this, please chime that in and feed into the various docs and project boards that we've got, and speak up in Slack and Discourse as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that I think the alpha is now essentially feature complete-ish.
Apart from those two areas,
it's the health checking that's the next bit, but then that's like an additive thing. Like, we're not going to be changing anything that's there unless something's broken or needs improving. But it's all about polishing in the UX now, and particularly the health stuff, so that the cluster tells you when things are wrong, and tells you what's wrong and how to fix things. Because right now there's too much magic needed to know what's going on, and it's too easy to break things. So we want to make things a bit more idiot-proof and a bit easier to use.
And that's probably, just to go back to the maturity model as well, go and have a look at that, seek that out. You can see why the initial target is the 3 big cloud providers. Reason being is because it's simply easier to be able to do automated testing and more consistent environments for some more chance of people to have success. We don't want to set people up for a fall. We want to say, making sure that when we get through these different phases, that they are reliable to the point that we're saying, and people actually have, it's doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. So, once we get past those, then we get to a GA, then we can start looking at other different providers. That's not to say that people can't get involved and working on it. We've got people working on ARM already, which is amazing. More different types of homegrown Kubernetes setups, which pop up all the time. time. Keep feeding that in and keep helping out and being involved, because that's all. It's the best way for it to go faster. Okay. Was there any questions? We've got 7 minutes left. Any questions about this or anything else in the planet of technology, I guess? Hey, Youssef.
Hi, can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
So thanks for the great work. I was wondering about an issue that was opened a few days ago, I think by the other James, it was about how do we tell Tekton to recreate a pod if it fails, for example, in one of the steps. So any advance on that? And it would be great to have something like that.
I'd have to go search for the issue, but there's Lighthouse has this thing called a Lighthouse job, and Lighthouse should recreate a pipeline run if it doesn't exist, so that if a pipeline run is deleted or evicted, well, so there's Tekton should restart a pod if it disappears for a pipeline run, and if a pipeline run disappears, the Lighthouse job should recreate the pipeline run. So there's this kind of double layer of protection right now. So Tekton should recreate pods if they're deleted.
Okay, maybe I did ask the question wrong. It's not about recreating the pod or the container that was removed. If the container fails, if the tests failed, can I get, or promote failed because of some mistake in the way I wrote my pipeline? Can it just recreate the pod and opens a patch for me and a shell for me and allow me to retry manually the pipe?
Okay. So there's a couple of things here. By the way, great question. There is something in Tekton now that if a step fails, you can always do something. So there's like a finally kind of steps. You could say, it doesn't matter if the pipeline passes or fails, I always want to do this thing. So you could define a step, for example, report test results. You might not care if the test pass or fail. You always want to report them with whatever happened. So reporting the log or the tests or whatever, you can always do those. But I think what you're asking for is slightly different. If a step fails, you want to suspend the pipeline so that you can then kubectl exec inside it and fix it. For that, there is an issue somewhere in Tekton. I think I might have raised it, or I saw one that someone had done. Basically, there needs to be. It's a bit like when you do debugging on a pod. There needs to be a debug type mode where, on failure, just suspend the pipeline. What you can do for now is you can just add an extra step. So you can add an extra step that says, if anything goes bad, just do a sleep. So you can add a finally step to Tekton that just sleeps forever. Now the downside is you have to modify the pipeline, which is kind of an unfortunate thing. It would be really nice to make this always there, but then there is the issue, how do you know when to turn this on and off? It's a bit like debugging. You don't want to always turn on debugging. You want to turn it on or off now and again. So what would be nice is a generic parameter, let's say. A generic parameter that you could turn on, suspend on failure. And then once, if a parameter fails, it would then suspend and stay around for a bit. And then you could then use Octant or whatever to log into the open a terminal and then try out the pipeline. I've wanted that for a very, very long time. And now we're on Tekton, we should be able to do it because Tekton has the finally step. But do you want to try it? Do you want to try it out? Just do a sleep on the finally step.
Okay, we could add an environment variable that we get checked before doing the while true sleep or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it should be very easy just to add a parameter to the pipeline that says, pause and fail, true or false or something. And depending on this flag, if the flag's true, it just sleeps forever or something like that. Sleeps for infinity or something. And then at some point, we'll probably need some kind of garbage collector that goes, We've got loads of sleeping pipelines. Let's kill them all or something. They've been around too long. So we could add some kind of garbage collect, or maybe you sleep for a maximum of 2 hours or something. Or
Yeah.
like
Okay.
no, we should be able to try that. You should be able to try if you upgrade your cluster with JX GitOps upgrade to get the latest greatest, create a new quick start. You'll have a Tekton pipeline in your quick start, and just modify the pull request pipeline. Because then every time you commit, and then create a pull request, and if every time you do a commit in your pull request, it will reuse that new pipeline. So then you could just keep hacking the Tekton and just trying out. Every time you do a push, it will rerun that pipeline, and you can try it out. So you could just by hand add the finally step, and then you can see if it works, and then we could just keep polishing it. And if it works, we can add it into our pipeline catalog, and we can add a parameter to turn it on and off. Right? Tekton pipelines have parameters, and we could maybe have the default value of the parameter is false, and if you specify true, then it will enable it, kind of thing.
Okay, great. I'll try to do that.
That would be awesome. Which reminds me, we need to fix Octant to be able to open terminals in pipelines. We think it's just using the wrong shell expression. We think, because shells are in different places in different.
It's because different, depending on what your build pod is, it has different images, so it doesn't have. They had one specific one. We thought maybe there's a way we can figure it out. We can annotate something maybe.
Or something like that. So, because what would be awesome is if we add the sleep on failure step, which should work right now, right? We should be able to just open the terminal in the failed pipeline inside Octant, which would be awesome. That'd be so awesome.
Can we also think about the security implications of this?
RBAC would prevent certain. I think as long as you have a cluster RBAC, that can prevent users being able to exec into a pod. That's one way.
Pod execing is a separate role, so you can just say no one's allowed to pod exec, or you're only allowed to pod exec in one namespace. So you could have one namespace with some pipelines that you are allowed to, but then other namespaces you can't. So you could use namespaces, or you could just disable it for everybody, or for anybody but certain users or whatever. Or maybe there's a play workspace somewhere that you are allowed. Unfortunately, there's no way with RBAC of choosing which pods you can RBAC into, you can exec into. It's either on or off. In the namespace, you can either exec into all pods, or you can't exec into any.
One of the things we've always done by Jenkins X, I know we're running out of time, but one of the things with Jenkins X, we've always run the build pods in the same kind of JX namespace, but there is a way to be able to run build pods in a different namespace. So it could be that maybe particular groups, we could actually run that in a different namespace and then give our back to users, to certain teams, for example.
That would be really nice. You could just override the namespace.
Yeah.
You could even just override the namespace on a pull request to say, I want to diagnose this. So I'm allowed to kubectl exec in my namespace. So I'm going to run this build pod in my namespace, without the production secrets, but with my secrets or whatever. So we could maybe do something like that, where you could work on a pull request locally in your own namespace or something like that. But Yusuf, I want to see if this works, by the way, this sleep thing. This sounds awesome. I'm really excited.
Let us know how it goes.
Let's know.
On Slack.
I'm going to Google the finally step as well, because I've forgotten what it looks like, and I'll post that on Slack just so you know the YAML to put into your pipeline.
It's 2 minutes past 5. That was a really good session. I know it was pretty long. I think some really good questions as well. So hopefully it's more people getting involved with the helping out with the Jenkins X3 Alpha. So thanks again for that. And I guess let us know what else we want to be talking about and showing and questions as well in future office hours. And CDCon details are in there that Kara's posted, and Kara's got a talk this week as well. So let's try and catch up with that as well. It's going to be awesome.
Can't wait.
Thanks very much for everyone, and see you all online.
Have a good week. Cheers.